gentlemen. So we're going to start theme 2. I know there's a bit of an inevitable delay in our start, and I trust that we'll become a bit more populated as we go along. I can see that people are still joining other sessions, I noted outside. And for those of you, I hope we'll be able to go a little bit into the lunchtime since we started a little bit late, but I will try to keep all of our speakers to time. We had foreseen that each of the catalysts would speak for about 8 minutes. So I will try to be quite strict with that. But we have an eminent panel here, and of course, as you know, this session is on showcasing results and demonstrating impact. And our outcome here is really to see what kind of measurements are possible. Still. But measurements in a multidimensional way. So, of course, production, but also social, economic, as would be production, but also environmental and other kinds of measurements, and also how these are related to investment. And in order to move through things, you probably noted in this session, we had 3, in effect, sub-sessions. One which will be looking at the relationship of measurement, demonstrating results, and investments in relationship to the Sustainable Development Goals. By the way, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Thomas Price. I'm the co-chair of this session with Danush Dinesh, who's sitting over there. So we'll be alternating as chairs as well. And our second sub-session will be looking at how we can really measure with more precision the many dimensions of rural development in agriculture. And the final one will be on boring more down to the national level. So without further ado, I'll move on to our first speaker, who is JiaBin Huang, who's coming to us from the Asti, and she'll explain to you what that is, and from IFPRI in Washington, D.C. Yanka?
It's not that big. This was a little bit of a challenge for me. It's like first you don't know who your audience is, and it's also this is a presentation where I don't present data, so I feel very uncomfortable because we've been active in about 80 countries. Most of our work focuses on Africa and South Asia, but we are also now completing work in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we've done some work in Ghana as well, and also in some other parts of Asia. So this is kind of our portfolio on the data. We work with a large network of national, regional and international partners, and this is led by IFPRI. So we're not only focusing on investments, but also on capacities of researchers and institutional arrangements and so on. But when you go to talk about the SDGs, what was the topic of this session, how is Asti relevant to the SDGs? Yeah, it's very easy. We contribute to Development Goal 2, and there's a target that calls for increase in investment in rural infrastructure, agricultural research, and extension, and that's the agricultural research is where we come in. We actually are working on revising our set of indicators. Having the right indicators is central to our work, but it's also central. A good system is also central to help decision makers or analysts to better understand strong and weak areas in their research institutes or in their NARs in agriculture R&D. We actually, I think you were mentioning this morning systems. We have, Asti is itself is 15 years old, but it's built on work that has been ongoing for 3 decades. I've been part of it for quite some time now. But we had a review last year, and it actually was, the review was said that we have provided an effective platform allowing policymakers, others, to track countries' agriculture R&D progress over time. At these meetings, I often hear Asti is the numbers this morning also. And it's been used by a lot of reports, and also, as I said, this is clear that for the target 2A, Asti will be the main source of measuring the investments in agricultural research. We are actually, we found that actually the uptake of our information is less used at the national level than that it is at the regional and international level. So we are funded by the Gates Foundation. We're actually going to really work more on what we can do in enhancing the in-country outreach to really be sure that the key Asti outputs and findings are better used and better inform national policy and decision makers, national policy makers, and also in decision-making processes. This also again means having better indicators, but also linking our information up with what else is going on in the country, but also the way we are messaging the information, and we are actually working on this as well. And yeah, I also build in also the rates of returns, the cost and benefits, and so on, of additional investments in agricultural research. And we really will be teaming up with other organizations for this, for more effective joint and specific in-country outreach and policy influence. And that's also why I thought this morning was very interesting to see what the CGIAR is kind of consolidating their efforts in a number of countries, and we think that is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Nierke. Thank you so much for staying very much on time, even more on time. Just to recall, we'll be going through all of the Catalyst interventions. We'll have a bit of time for question and answer. And then in the afternoon, you'll be able to go into these topics, either these topics or those that you select at your tables in much more depth as we go towards proposing specific collective actions to feed into the overall statement. So with that, I'd like to go to Remy Kahan, who is going to be speaking to us from PIPARD on funding demand-driven research and innovation partnerships. We do have a clicker if you prefer to stand when you speak, for those who do wish so. There you are, Remy. To you.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Remy Kahane. I present this short presentation, introduction about PayPart on behalf of Jonas Mugabe, the director, manager of the project, and myself, a co-manager. So because PayPart is indeed a platform for African-European partnership in agricultural research for development. And the main objective was really to strengthen the partnership, and the main indicator being an increased number of proposals, an increased number of partnerships and consortia, an increased number of projects funded. PayPart gathers nine partners, partner institutions. It has developed 4 instruments based on one approach, that is the multi-stakeholder partnership. And so the users-led process for consortia is the first instrument. Then incentive funds for consortia, so a way how to increase the relationship between the needs and the proposals, the translation into research question. Competitive funding, so the way how to fund, to translate the research question into research proposals and projects. And then the strategy on communication and capacity strengthening. So very briefly, I will give one example for each of these instruments. So on ULP, so ULP is, so users-led process, is really a mechanism or a method to organize, strengthen, and sustain a partnership on agricultural innovation. So, and you have the several steps that were followed to build up this mechanism based on, so the users, so the analysis the first analysis of the needs and of the professionals. So not only of farmers, but also of the private sector, for instance. And this analysis of the needs shall also combine with the priorities and make priorities in research orientations. So for instance, in West Africa, the ULP Coliacepe was focusing on mango, a main economic activity, with one constraint, that is the fruit fly. And instead of concentrating on the control management, they looked at one constraint, that is the waste, how to use the waste of this mango industry. And they went to they formulated key questions, research questions, either as using it as animal feeds, or as energy composting, or as cosmetics. So using the kernel, for instance, of mango, extracting oil and making cosmetic products from this. For incentive funds, the example here is a round table of experts focusing on aflatoxin issues in Africa, because expertise in Europe, so European scientists have developed a lot of expertise, either on cereals or on legumes, or also on milk. And this expertise is really addressing also the big problem faced in Africa. And the incentive was really made to help translate into research questions and identify funding opportunities as well. So the case on aflatoxin put some lights on the analytical aspects, so how to measure the aflatoxin presence, then the post-harvest practices, and then also put some lights on the policy aspects and regulatory aspects. The competitive funding, so you are more used to that, and they are based on real case studies where research questions are turned into projects and adapted or tailored according to the terms of reference of the goals. So here, for instance, you have an example of a research project targeting the setup of a production unit of trichoderma fungi to incorporate into the compost, and then to enrich the compost and the soil in vegetable production in Burkina Faso. And what is interesting in this case is that from a research project, a real a startup has been created, gathering several partners, and this startup is now in the phase of scaling out through Western Africa. So the last aspect is the development of a strategy of communication and capacity strengthening that is really important, or that came out to be really important. And for instance, we had a workshop, and we promoted a workshop, or a reflection workshop, really on strengthening the capacity and communication that put in light the role of brokerage. So who is a broker, the best broker? What is the role of a brokerage, and how this brokerage activity should be emphasized and should be funded, acknowledged and funded in any partnership platform in the future. So just my last slide, some take-home messages from people experience. So about brokerage, that is really seen as key to organize and strengthen multi-stakeholders partnership in agricultural research for development. And we also saw the crucial stage in the whole process was the stage where the needs shall be have to be turned into research questions. And these needs really the participation, the contribution of all the partners, not only scientists, but also all other stakeholders. And so the need to diversify the funding sources is also essential. And from the beginning, we started from so EC, calls for proposals, and then finally we are targeting any calls, any possibilities to get supports for the partnerships. And what is also important is that the benefits from these multi-stakeholder partnerships shall not be seen only as figures and funds, but also the benefits, the social benefits, the human relationship, the creation of trust, and to create economic activity, employment, and confidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Remy. I'm sure we'll come back maybe in the questions, but I imagine at the roundtable these questions of how we quantify and consider benefits which are not strictly economic or financial or productive. So now we're going to have Ehsan Dolo from Biodiversity, who will be speaking to us specifically about the Sustainable Development Goals, and something that's rather complex but extremely important, given climate change and for many other reasons, ecosystem services and how they can be counted towards the SDGs. Ehsan.
Thank you, Thomas. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm presenting this talk on behalf of my colleagues from Biodiversity International, Fabrice Leclerc, who is the PI of that project, Sarah Jones and Silva Wood, also from Biodiversity, and Justin Johnson from the University of Minnesota. Now, the work is a really collaborative project which is led by Biodiversity under the CGIAR research program on water, lands, and ecosystem services, but also with research supported under other CRPs like PIM and other CG partners. It has a strong collaboration with the Natural Capital Project, Stanford and Minnesota universities, and is funded under the Science for Nature and People Partnership. Now, in this talk, I would like to present their work so far on the development of a tool which is called MESH, which stands for Mapping Ecosystem Services and Human Well-Being. That sort will allow policymakers to evaluate the impacts of their investments on ecosystem services and human well-being, and how it can help countries to link with some of these sustainable development goals. Now, the key challenge question is, what does environment contribute to development? And how does it link to the sustainable development goals? Now, if we take the third system level outcomes, SLO3 of the CGIAR strategic research framework, i.e. the improved natural resource management and ecosystem services, it sort of links directly to the SDG 15 on life on land. But rather than looking at this SLO3 or the relevant SDG as an independent goal, we ask the question about how does nature or environment contribute to the other development-oriented SLOs, like reduce poverty or improve nutrition and health, and other SDGs that speak to those SLO goals. Now, no doubt you know that environment and agriculture has always been at odds. Agriculture has always been seen as a threat or harmful to the environment in the way that we practice agriculture. But what we need is a paradigm shift, in that by integrating nature and conservation into agriculture, it would allow us to achieve and attain some of these multiple development goals. So this is what MESH tries to do. MESH is an integrative framework that calculates ecosystem service production functions and try to map the ecosystem services provision under different management scenarios. Now, MESH uses a modeling framework that accompanies large investments in landscape change. And here in this example here, it's applied to the strategic action program of the Volta Basin Authority, which involves several countries in West Africa. The first step is to identify what investment decisions are being made by the authority in this case, and we consider the various management options that surround that investment choice. We then generate scenarios to model these management options. Here, for example, the flow of water from upstream to downstream. And in step 3, we then model these choices that impact land use composition and configuration, and thus the delivery of the ecosystem services, which is step 4. But the most important step, step 5, is where we try to translate the benefits from the biophysical measures that we are measuring to measures of human well-being, including questions of equity and integrity. So what have we done so far? Now we have developed a test model, the mesh model itself, which allows the various scenarios to be defined. That's step 1. And it also is able to select specific ecosystem services that you can select from different areas here. Then you run your model, and you can view that model in terms of graphically, but also in terms of a report that is used, that partners countries can use to report directly to the SDG goals. So, as I said earlier, this project is led by Biodiversity, and the research is supported by these. I've already said all these, so I will not go over them again. So, in fact, what MESH allows us to do is to allows these ecosystem services output to be mapped to the SDG goal indicators. So far, the project has been working with partners in West Africa, where MESH has been introduced and feedback has been received from ministries from the various countries like Tanzania, Ghana, and Burkina Faso. The tool has also been tested, as I said, in the Volta Basin Authority Strategic Action Plan, and the tool itself has been released on the NatCap project and also can be seen from the website, from the WLE website. Now, what we want to achieve through GCAR3 is that we want to present here an approach that repositions natural resources as a means of achieving the SDG goal, in addition to specific SDG outcomes. Through the model, I think we can demonstrate progress on developing an integrative model designed for analyzing trade-offs as well as synergies between these multiple objectives in large-scale investment programs. And we also hope to get feedback from partners, particularly development banks and agencies who are charged with reporting on these utility functions of the model, and perhaps to see potential cases for testing and refining these models in real life decision. So finally, who could be our partners? Well, we are looking for research partners that could further improve the model functionality and outputs. We are looking for agencies that could be charged with developing national level SDG strategies and reporting on progress and outcome, where MESH could be used as a utility. We are looking at the donors, development banks that can better understand their return on investments and potential unintended consequences of large-scale development investment. So we talk about the Volta Basin Strategic Action Plan, but there are other big investment programs like SAPCOT in Tanzania, the Great Wall, funded by the World Bank from West to East Africa. maybe an establishment of protected area and the impact that this can have downstream, and other new irrigation infrastructure projects envelope. Right? So these are just some examples of where mesh could really contribute in analyzing the trade-off, between the investment we made and the impact that this have on ecosystem services and urban well-being. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ehsan. It's very interesting to see how to translate something as complex as ecosystem services into calculating what the benefits would be in multiple dimensions, environmental, but of course you alluded to social and otherwise towards the SDGs. So now we're going to have Raghunath Godake, who I'm sure you've all seen on the podium in the plenary. So I guess we don't really need to introduce Raghunath, who is of course at a party based in Bangkok in Asia. And he'll be speaking about how the SDGs and what they mean to research, agricultural research in his region. Raghunath.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chair. This particular presentation is to really talk about briefly SDGs, which have been approved recently in September 2015, and the implications or what that means to agriculture research, including innovations, in the Asia-Pacific region. So this is the intent of this particular topic. Actually, this presentation has been based on recently approved APARI Vision 2030. And GFAR and all other partners, they very actively participated in this Vision 2030. The reason being that reflects what is likely scenario as far as research is concerned and innovation is concerned in Asia-Pacific region. Secondly, also as part of strategic planning development, currently we are taking stock and reviewing what is happening, and that is another consideration when we develop this presentation today. In fact, as we know that we have got 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 169 targets. We are talking about economic, social, and environmental trade-off for balances, and we are talking about poverty, hunger, protection, planet, prosperity, all. Now, just to link what this means to agriculture sector in general, we talk about extreme poverty, directly linked through agriculture, productivity and sustainability of agriculture. These are the indicators out of 169. Ending hunger, assuring food and nutritional security, affordable, safe, nutritious, healthy food, empowering women and youth, and especially girls, halting biodiversity loss, addressing climate change and disasters, ensuring sustainable consumption and production, including, of course, the pre, post, and value chain losses, and full productive employment, sustainable economic growth. So these are the key indicators. They have got direct relevance to agriculture sector, not only in Asia-Pacific region, but globally. On that basis, we just thought about what are the facts relevant to Asia-Pacific region. Poverty, 480 million people are still in the region, Asia-Pacific. They are poor, extremely poor, $1.25 per day. Hunger and malnourishment, 525 million, 66% of the global population, global hungry population. Then current population, 4.6 billion, 62% of the global population. 1.8 billion, about 40% directly depend on agriculture, and they stay in rural areas. So that is implication for agriculture sector. These are the general considerations. No poverty or eradication of total poverty, zero hunger, and responses to consumption and production, etc., waste loss. We have got some facts at global level, so they are produced just for understanding. They need not be discussed in details, but we think that there are about 8 SDGs. They are having some kind of direct implication coming out of agriculture sector. And this is based on evidence elsewhere that what has exactly happened and how we can expect similar changes in Asia Pacific region. On that basis, we came up with research focus areas. There are about 12. One is, of course, introducing and adopting new technologies, and including, of course, biotechnology for doubling the production by 2030. Number 2, designing efficient ways of producing, supplying affordable, safe, and nutritional, healthy food, and that is something is crux of APARI Vision 2030. Number 3, introducing and adopting new technologies for reducing pre-harvest or post-harvest losses, plus contributing to value addition, so whatever is required in that area. Designing systems of integrating smallholder agriculture into manufacturing and agro industries. That means the dependence on agriculture, direct production base, needs to be reduced by population so that they are engaged productively in agri-related other areas, service sectors and industries. Then designing efficient and sustainable management and use of natural resources, especially water and land, forests and trees, followed by development of systems of mitigation of an adaptation to climate change. And that is important, adaptation. And of course, weather aberrations like El Niños and droughts and wet periods and cyclones. Besides developing systematic processes and preventing transboundary diseases, and that is also a major issue in Asia Pacific region. Developing integrated agriculture and food value chains, actors and markets going up, not only at individual level, but at sector levels. And that is for economic growth and efficiency. Followed by that is enhancing application and use of ICT, promote, that is also important. Designing adaptation of sustainable generation and use of energy, including bioenergy, that is becoming important area. Designing prioritization and linking of research to development outcomes, that is prioritization is also becomes, and then eventually agriculture research policy, investment or innovations or infrastructure or institutions. So these are key areas, and that will impact pathways will suggest that they will contribute to development outcomes. We have got a couple of slides, but I don't want to go into that. But then that means then they will help realizing sustainable development goals by 2030, at least those targets which are applicable here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raghunath. There's well, your region is huge and populous, so looking at the diversity there and the implications of all that is really quite ambitious. So it'll be interesting to see a bit later how we can draw this to some of the national examples, I think, which will be spoken about, and how you work regionally at that. Now we'll have Dr. Emile Frisson, who many of you know, I'm sure, if not all of you, who is speaking for the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems most recently, and they have a very interesting work on diversified agroecology. Please.
Thank you. Just 2 words about the International Panel of Experts that is relatively recent. It's co-chaired by Olivier de Schutter and Olivier Jambi. It has 22 members with a cross-regional balance. And the particularities is that we cover a very broad range of disciplines to be able to look at a holistic way at food systems. And we are not only academics, but also have civil society and various representatives of constituencies there. We take a transdisciplinary approach, combining different sources of knowledge, not just academic knowledge, but also knowledge of the different stakeholders involved. And it's an independent panel, and that's important because it wants to really look at the political economy. Who's pulling the strings? Why are things the way they are? Now, the link to Sustainable Development Goals, there was a very strong call for a holistic approach in implementing the goals, because we realize that unless that is done, we won't achieve anything if we take things in a compartmentalized way. And therefore, sustainable food systems as an approach is an important way to contribute to achieving that integration. And within that, if you look at the agricultural production, diversified agroecological systems are needed to achieve that level of integration and sustainability. Now, what do we mean by a sustainable food system? Of course, it has to be economically viable and lead to rural development, but in a way that is socially equitable. It has to provide positive health outcomes, but but in a way that is environmentally sustainable. It has to take into consideration the cultural identities and differences, and also to be not impacting on the sustainability of food systems elsewhere. Now, food systems are very complex, and I'm not going to explain this diagram, but unless we really look at the whole system, we will always be optimizing some aspects, often at the expense of others. And when we look at what is actually wrong with our food system, there's been a lot of concerns raised about the persistent problem of triple burden of malnutrition, the environmental sustainability, and maybe a particular attention to land degradation, which doesn't receive sufficient attention. The social inequities that continue to persist, and also a neglect of cultural values in various worlds. Now, IPES Food has decided to, through a report, to look at what can be done on the production side, looking at how the dominant paradigm of that it can be summarized as industrial agriculture has led us to the problems we are confronting today, and how diversified agroecological systems can provide solutions to those problems. And a major question that we asked right from the beginning is, how come that despite the expanding evidence based on the potential of diversified agroecological systems to deliver on all these dimensions, we do not see a major transition in that direction? And that's what led us to take a political economy lens in that analysis of the food systems. We identified 8 what we call lock-ins or vicious cycles that make it more difficult to change the major paradigm. And that's, I'm not going to go into the detail of others: path dependency, a main orientation towards trade and export, the expectations mainly in cities of cheap food, compartmentalized thinking, whether at the university, the disciplinary departments that really don't talk to each other, in different ministries that don't talk to each other at the government level, and even within the private sector. Short-term thinking, bottom line, return on investment in the short term. And also the feed the world rhetoric. We heard a lot about the 9 billion people we need to feed, and often that has been used, I would say, as an excuse to say, well, we have to do more of what we've been doing the same way. And I think that's a wrong approach. The measures of success, and that's relevant to this topic here, as long as we continue to measure only productivity or calories per hectare, we are going to be make it very difficult to have a transition. As long as the externalities, the impact on health, the impact on the environment, are not taken into consideration. And finally, the probably biggest lock-in that influences all the others is concentration of power. If we look at the power that today is in the hand of a small number of input suppliers and also of output traders and retailers, the impact that has on the entire food system is very, very significant. Fortunately, and that's the positive side of the message here, there are also emerging opportunities for a transition to diversified agroecological systems. First of all, the global recognition of the potential of diversification and agroecology, starting with the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, IASTD, the recent meeting at FAO on agroecology, despite a lot of resistance, finally got it. A number of national policies that have started to change in significant ways. Emerging multi-stakeholder initiatives that take a food system approach at different levels, with food policy councils being established. Integrated landscape thinking with a city-region system, food system approach. Integrated landscape management that takes the various dimensions into consideration. Also, at the level of universities, there's hope for change with integrated food system science being taken up in food science centers. But also what is maybe most encouraging is the large number of peer-to-peer research actions, Campesina, Farmer Field School based on agroecology that are popping up in different places, and that should be encouraged. Healthy eating and sustainable sourcing concerns by consumers, I think is also a source of hope, and emerging different types of short supply chains. Now, what do we need to do in order to move in that direction is, of course, first of all, to create a supportive environment. We have to look at full cost accounting. The externalities can no longer just continue to be ignored and paid by society at large. National and regional food policies and strategies that look at food systems as a whole should be established. Facilitation of access to land. This is a problem in the north as in the south for different reasons, but it's both present there. Support measures to allow the transition. We know, for example, in organic farming, the transition from traditional high input farming to agroecology or organic farming is a painful process that needs to be supported. We need to remove the policy barriers to diversity, for example, seed legislation or policy that prevent the exchange and sale of traditional seeds. Support of community-based organizations that play a key role in moving these initiatives forward. Also on the market side, we have to be creative in supporting the emergence and further development of farmer markets, producer cooperatives, and more direct links between producers and consumers, and also the role that public procurement can play in order to help create a market for more sustainable production is important. And finally, and that's maybe also particularly relevant to the GCAR meeting here, is on reorienting innovation and knowledge pathways, develop systems approaches in education, move away from the silos that we have known and that have limited our systemic approach. Reorienting public research, both at the national level, but also at the CGIAR, really moving towards agroecology, moving from high input intensive agriculture towards knowledge-intensive agriculture and participatory research. We heard a lot already about the need to involve farmers right from the beginning in the process and consider them as real actors and researchers. And finally, collaboration between agriculture extension and health and public health extension services that to deliver the same message. So you will find much more detail in the report that is currently in a layout phase and that will be available on the following website in a couple of weeks. I look forward to discussing some of these things with you later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emil. That opens up some very interesting questions, as you said, full cost accounting, getting at, I was recently at a meeting in Brighton on contested agronomy, where we talked about political agronomy. You talked about political economy. We talked about political agronomy. So question of we're measuring, but also what are we measuring and how do the SDGs relate to that in their complexity? So I'm sure you have a few questions. I would suggest we go for 10 or 15 minutes, a little bit into the lunch break, if you all agree, because I'm sure given the richness and the interest of these various presentations that you have a few questions you'd like to raise, and perhaps even the panelists themselves would like to raise some. But I'm very pleased that you kept very well to time. I'm quite impressed. Thank you so much for that. So, okay, Artie, my co-chair, has a question.
I was just trying to help you, Thomas, in case there weren't any questions from the floor just now. And I'm sure there will be. But just very quickly, a note of information as well, that we have two rapporteurs who have kindly agreed to record the outcomes from these sessions and who will be actually linking these sessions and discussions to the GCAR declaration. So Graham Teal and Shika Lizu have currently kindly agreed to do that. So just based on the brief that they have, which is like proposing the linkages, and the thematic outcome that we are striving towards, one of the things that comes out is the returns on investment that these existing programs have demonstrated. So with that background, I just want to direct this to Ninke and Remy. I mean, you both spoke about your respective programs, and I'm just interested to know, if any analysis or studies have been done around the returns of investment, which would make a more compelling statement to investors. Thanks.
Thank you. Would you like to react immediately?
For the Asti program, for instance, the investments which have been made over the last 10 or 15 years, if the kind of returns that have they been quantified, and if so, you already alluded to some of the impact it's created in terms of providing indicators and data for UN agencies and others, but has there been an attempt to actually quantify, over the course of the program, these are the impacts that it's delivered? So something like that.
I just might add, and I'm thinking there on Asti, but not only Asti. I know when we went to GCARD 2 in Uruguay, my colleague Ajit is there, he probably remembers the figures better than I do, that I believe Uruguay stated, well, Mario, we would know, I think in Uruguay you found the return of investment dollar for dollar was something like 20 times in agriculture, and they documented that. So that sort of thing is a very compelling argument to policymakers, to politicians, to people in Congress. So I think that's the kind of question in part that Danush was trying to get at. And I think Asti partially gets that, and certainly the ground-based sort of things in PAPARD in part are addressing that. We have a couple of people who want to intervene, but maybe you have something to say before I go to my next person, who is Ann Waters-Bayer back here. Oh.
Thank you. I found it very interesting what Emil was presenting about this report, the IPAS food. And I would like to know, because it's obviously already finished, it's going to be appearing fairly soon on the web, what other means, what other events, what other processes have you already planned for making this very widely known?
We are still working on that. There will be several list servers that will be distributing the report. We will be presenting the outcome in a number of meetings. The Food Tank Summit in September in California. We are looking at presenting it in Norway at the upcoming meeting on biodiversity and ecosystem services there. I've been in contact with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity because agrobiodiversity is very much on the agenda of the convention this year. And we are looking still for some other opportunities, but we are also going to rely very much on partners. Civil society organizations have an important role to play in disseminating that. And we look forward to also suggestions on places where this message could be delivered.
Thank you, Emil. I think we have Ajit, Maru, and then next, yes. Don't worry, we'll try not to, yes, and please here. I'm sorry, I don't know everybody's name, so maybe say who you are as you intervene. That will be good for as we break up into the next session.
Ajit Maru, Senior Officer from the Global Forum on Agriculture Research. Thomas, two issues. The first one I'd like to refer to the ROI issue. I'm sure those of us who follow on the investment issues in agriculture research might have seen a very recent paper on a very contentious subject, and that is that there is an argument that sometimes ROIs are given for agriculture research which are unbelievable. If you want, I can. Times, as Thomas knows. So I can draw attention to it. And there are very good arguments put in that paper in which say that why this is not so. Now coming to the other issue, which I think is my more interest, is what Emil has been talking about, and Agrifood Systems. And I sometimes feel that we somehow move, and this is my personal, we are evolving. You know, when we look at agri-food systems, are they not a part of the larger political, economic, and social system? That's a question that I'm not able to answer many a times, because we try to look at subsystems. And when we look at subsystems, we isolate the society, the behaviors, the attitudes, the human factors. We do agree that we need to look at, as scientists, we need to break it down. But instead of having a reductionist approach, which agroecology is not about, it is a constructivist approach. But even if we look at it further, but my question then comes to this specific theme. How do you measure the current concepts of impact? How do you measure the current concepts of outcome in that particular system, which is then having so many variables, so many parameters that you need to study?
Well, thank you very much, Ajit. You're really getting, it's sort of almost a mini catalyst here. So please, Raghunath, and then please the next, and then here. And please identify yourself. I'm sorry, I should have done that earlier. I didn't even identify myself when I started as the chair, so I'm talking about myself as well, so please.
Thank you. My name's Wayne Nellis. I'm a visiting scholar at Chulalongkorn University School of Agricultural Resources in Bangkok. My question actually is mainly about data in reference to Asti, but it also cuts across all of the other presentations. And my question is, what kind of data is being collected on extension services? And I've tried to, I'm just beginning a project about this, a small little research project in Southeast Asia. And if you look at World Bank indicators, many other data sets, seems to be no systematic collection on extension services. And I'd like to know what Asti is doing about that and the implications for that in terms of understanding, you know, what is the content, what is being, knowledge is being transferred, etc. Very long question, could be a longer question, but I think you get the picture. I'm interested in the question of agroecological learning and research. And so that's a project we're just beginning, a small one. Not well enough funded at the moment, so I have to want to talk to some potential partners for collaboration. But really the question is about what is the data being collected now about extension and what needs to be more in that area.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you, Wayne. Please, Nyake.
we focus on R&D, so that is our focus. We get this question a lot. We actually, what we will be having is, which is another source of data that has been asked a lot, is about higher education. And we actually are going to cover that because it's the type of information we collect, because higher education agency do research. Extension, we've received this question a lot. I mean, it's not us probably who should do it, it's probably GFRAS or some sort of organization that is really knowledgeable about extension services, advisory services, but it needs funding. And for us, doing the agricultural research part, I mean, we're not even global, we just are project funded, we have to raise our own salaries, it's 100% project funding. If you want to do extension services, we already have problems in covering the private sector there. It's very difficult to do that. A lot of countries, what I understand is the systems, the extension systems that used to be more centralized, it's now very decentralized. You have private sector, it's also some organizations are doing a lot of other things than only extension services. So it really needs quite a lot of investment in, and we worked with FAO on a proposal, I think 10 years ago, on trying to do start with 5 pilot countries, because you need to start. Asti is built on a system that is ongoing for 30 years, and we still make changes. But if you want to set up one for extension service, measuring investments in extension, it really needs some pilot studies and some good amount of funding to really establish this. And
that's where it ends. The investment in data.
Okay, thank you, Nyanke. Please.
I'm Professor Liu Bio from University of Nairobi. My comment and question goes to the lady who presented on the Asti. A little bit of what I want to ask, as you've actually included in the last answer, but I'd just like to mention that I'm glad to hear that it has extended to 80 countries now, because I did attend a few of the first few workshops when it started. Indeed, it is a very good process. Much as you say it has been used a lot by the big organizations at the higher level, yes, it is good for planning at that level, but now that we are going rural and sort of basic, we are dealing with the small-scale farmers. You did mention that the national systems have not taken it up much. I just wanted to know what is being done to actually do an emphasis for Asti to be data to be used at that level, because that's where we need to start growing from. Thank you.
Yeah, it's actually part of we got extra funding from the Gates Foundation to really look in this issue. So we're first of all, the data we're working with we work with the main agricultural research institutes in all the countries. So we're really working with them in, first of all, also giving them better access to the data and giving them online tools that they can use the data. Like now, when you see, I did a no data presentation, but when you see our normal, if you go to our website, we have a lot of tools where you can compare countries. We will have that type of information at what I call then the subnational, but then at the agency level. And then we're working with our national partners, but also with other organizations like the SACS networks and other partners in the countries to really have this information more available, and also making the case on why countries need to invest in research, and then also we need to link up on the extension and services as well.
Okay, thank you. I think, yeah, please, Remy, please. Panelists, please intervene.
Yes, I would like to add some very recent efforts from the farmers' organizations, so especially in West Africa, about collecting, gathering, managing their data themselves about farming systems. So they call it observatoire, and so they are going to the research organizations or institutions to check that their methodology is appropriate, but they want to manage themselves the data collection and to own these data themselves, so that for them nobody else can manipulate or can use these data for other purposes. Because up to now, they were a bit in disagreement with some the procedure data were collected, or how the data were used without their own advice. So at least ROPA, if you know, so the network of farmers organizations in Western Africa. So ROPA has developed a methodology together with FAO, together with research institutions, international or national ones, to organize and collect these data on their own farms, but also on the capacities that are needed to strengthen so their knowledge, or also the extension services.
Okay, Amir, please.
One word concerning Ajit's comment about the need to really look at things in a more integrated way. This particular report is dealing with the production side, with agroecology and production systems, but it's really to be seen within the framework of total food systems approach. And there will be other reports that will be looking at other aspects, but we keep in mind always the entire food system down from inputs to waste after consumers, and I think it's very important to keep that big picture in mind indeed.
And I think Raghunath, I had a feeling you wanted to intervene when Ajit had made a statement as well.
I think this was related to methodological challenges when we talk about returns to research investment or investment in innovations, like where to stop and where to assume. Like there are so complex processes eventually if you include number of aspects of society and economy and environment and all these things. Something beyond, it is so complex that you will have to live with some sort of complexity. At the same time, you can go up to the level where realistic measurement is possible. And after that, give it some sort of impact pathways consideration so that you can link it to the higher level, but there your limitation remains with what is measurable. And then you can have theoretic theory of change or what are other considerations to assume certain pathways. And I think that combination is necessary to be assumed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Raghunath. Now, so who would like to have the last word here? I think we're going to break for lunch soon. We're going to have 1 hour because you saw we had a little bit of space for moving about between the sessions, but we will be reconvening at 1:45 sharp. So please, Dr. Patel.
Yeah. What I understand, we are focusing on measuring the outcomes as on today. Are we really planning for investing in these issues in 2030 or 2050? Because what I understand probably, when I look back to Western India, we didn't get qualitative research professionals to work in research institutes or extension institutes or educational institutes. So if we are to take up all these activities, we are focusing on agriculture and food chain, probably we will need a great number of professionals who are fully equipped. And for that, we are to invest right now in these issues, so as by investing in these issues, we can easily measure in 2030 or 2050 on these issues. I don't know how we are looking forward for these issues.
Panelists, any comments here? Emil.
I don't know if it directly answers your question, but I think looking at what needs to be measured to when we take a whole food system approach and the sustainability dimension of that, there are a number of encouraging initiatives like TEEP for agriculture and food that starts to look, it's mainly focusing on environmental externalities, but the IPES food panel itself has been commissioned to put up a report on the health externalities, which are not covered by TEEP for agriculture and food. And that will also lead to what kind of things need to be measured and looked at in the longer term if we want to take this true systemic approach.
All right. Yes, Graham. Please introduce yourself, by the way.
On roots, tubers, bananas. And I think we had some great conversations, but we should look at the expected theme outcome, capitalization of evidence and experience in measurement of impact. And so far we've had several quite nice frameworks, paradigms, things that might be measured, but we haven't really had very much of the evidence of actually measuring things. So maybe it's setting the scene, but I do hope that we can get onto that. And I just got one little example to share from the Asti work. So the question, I think Danush made a very good question there. So what's the use been made of Asti for actually measuring something? Now, Asti, I think, really measures not impact, but the inputs, the intensity of agricultural research. And what will be interesting will be to link what's the relationship between the intensity of agricultural research and the actual outcomes that accrue to that. And I know one piece of work that did try and do that, and that was by a standing panel of impact assessment. And they took the full-time equivalents at the level of particular commodities for Africa, and then looked at the investment that was occurring in agricultural research by commodity, and then tried to triangulate that with the value of those commodities in Africa. And then they were looking at, they used data from the DEVA studies, which have recently been completed, about agricultural research and the adoption of varieties, and tried to triangulate between what was the investment into agricultural research, what's the total net value of those commodities, and what's potential, what actually has been the adoption of new varieties. And that was just looking at the simplest thing possible. varieties, which is the most tangible thing to measure. And we've now got much grander things to measure. And even measuring varieties is quite tough. So the gentleman over there was mentioning we need a kind of a large group of people to measure these things. But even measuring some of the simple things is actually quite technically challenging and takes a lot of resources. So it'd be good that as we move forward, we can think more of the practical examples of what we've done to measure things so that we can keep on track to the theme outcome. And it's great to see the frameworks, but a little bit more of how practically they've been put into operation would be really good. And I think we'd all learn a lot from that.
Well, thank you very much for calling us to order, Graham, till we accomplish the outcome and the theme. So I think with that, I want to thank our panel very much. I hope we can give them a round of applause as we go to lunch. And I think Graham's intervention was very good for us as we go into much greater depth in the tables in this early afternoon session, how we really measure these things specifically.